Numbers chapter 13, if we turn there, we're going to discuss the second in a series of messages on our attitude. The title is, How's Your Attitude? Last week we discussed an attitude of superiority, feeling that more highly of ourselves than we ought to. And we're not always going to do this, but this week we're going to discuss the exact opposite attitude, and that's an attitude of inferiority. And we'll talk about what that means, look at some wonderful biblical examples of that truth. But we're going to read here in Numbers chapter 13. Before I start reading, it's the setting where Moses sends the 12 spies into the land of Canaan to spy it out, to see. It's not like they were wondering if this is a good place to go. God had already told them to go there. In fact, furthermore, he said, I'll be with you. So this is not like, check it out and see if this appeals to you. This is where you're going. Go get it. And so they sent some people in to look over the region. Took several days to do that before they got back. And they gave this report. And it's interesting to see how their opinions sort of conflicted each other. So let's pick it up in verse 25. And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. And they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel unto the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them and unto all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him and said, We came unto the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. And they showed them those examples. Nevertheless, things change in verse 28. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. If you know anything from history, going back to David's confrontation with Goliath and so forth, the Anakim were the race of giants. And we think of giants maybe from science fiction. We think of 50 feet. This is not. They were just taller, noticeably taller than the rest of the people. Somebody remember from your Sunday school days, perhaps as a child, about how tall was Goliath? 9.5 feet tall. So now that would be tall by today's standards, to be sure, but he was apparently the tallest. He and his brothers were the tallest of the tall Anakim, the race of the giants there. But it says, we saw the children of Anak there, and they were taller men, strong, formidable soldiers. And the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses. Now Caleb was one of the 12 spies that was sent in, and said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up what the Bible calls an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. An attitude of inferiority. The whole premise to this series of lessons is taken again from Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7. It says, As he thinketh, as a man thinketh, or as we think in our hearts, so are we. We are what we think. We become what we think of ourselves, our worldview, of our enemies, whatever the case may be. It has an effect on our behavior. The mind is an incredible thing. I did some research this past week. The average brain weighs about 3 pounds. So if you take your estimated weight and you subtract 3 from that number, that's how much you'd weigh if you took your brain out. It's by far and away the most complex organ in the human body. It's a central command center for our thought, our memory, our motion, our movement, our emotions. All of those are tied into our brain. It possesses about 86 billion neurons and receives about 25 to 30% of the entire blood flow from your heart. A lot of the blood goes to the brain, which is why when that is restricted, you start having major problems in other bodily functions. 60% of the human brain is made up of fat, making it the fattiest organ in our bodies. So you would be anatomically correct to call someone a fathead. But I wouldn't suggest you do that. That's not too smart. But you could say that, and you would be accurate to say you're a fathead, because it is primarily made up 60% of fat. Your brain isn't fully formed until about age 25, which probably explains a lot about why young people do the things that they do before they reach full maturity, adulthood. Young males between 14 and 24, how often has it been asked of them, why would you do that? Well, because their brains aren't formed, they're not thinking straight. Brain information can travel up to 350 miles per hour. There's a myth that says that we only use about 10% of our brains. In fact, when I tried to confirm the veracity, the truthfulness of that statement, I discovered people who re-perpetuated that myth, that we only use 10% of our brains. The truth is, we use most of our brains. In fact, we use them all the time. We even use our brains while we're sleeping. So I think somebody believes that if you were able to use your brain to full capacity, you could be a brilliant, genius. No, we use most of our brains, in spite of the myth that's been going around for years. Men have slightly larger brains than women. I wouldn't bring that up, men, in a discussion with your wives, but statistically, your brain is a little larger than your wife's. And if you're thinking and you're smart, you won't bring that up again. I just thought I'd throw that out at you just so you know that. We think and use our brains all the time. And according to the book of Proverbs, what we think, we ultimately become. And so if we think poorly or negatively of ourselves, we will not reach our full potential as God's children, simply on the basis of how we perceive ourselves to be. There are a lot of people running around, many of them calling themselves Christians, who feel inferior. Look at the last verse again of our text and see what these men said. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. The important thing there, what I'm trying to stress is, if we don't look at ourselves in our full relationship with God and our God-given potential, and we look at ourselves in an inferior way, it will not be long before other people perceive us to be the person we think we are. And I'll just give an example of that. I'm not trying to get into the field of psychology, but we have all met people who have a low self-esteem, or people that have other issues where they don't feel positively about themselves for one reason or another. When that happens, it affects how they think and therefore how they behave, and other people can pick up on those cues. Have you ever met somebody who you would describe as a person who gets very little or no respect? They're not bad people necessarily, they're not stupid people, but you've met people, I have, that just other people don't seem to give them the measure of respect that we would give to other people. And that really starts with them. When they don't look at themselves as worthy of that respect, other people subconsciously pick up on those cues and they treat people how they think they are perceived in their eyes. And that's exactly what's happening. And come on, really. We're grasshoppers. They pick an insect. We're like grasshoppers in the sight of these people here in the land. If you think you are unimportant or unneeded or inadequate or inferior or without value, other people will probably look at you that way as well. So we considered people who have a higher opinion of themselves than they should. Now let's consider those of us who maybe have a lower opinion of ourselves than we should. For those of you who aren't familiar with this story, this involves a time after a long period of wandering in the wilderness where God said it's time to go in and claim the land that I promised to you 40 years ago. It's interesting that they went out to spy out their land, according to the first verse of our text, for 40 days. And their rebellion of 40 years was tied into their rebellion against God and the time that they went into search of them. I wonder if that was coincidental or whether they had just kind of finished looking around the whole region and came back and it just happened to be 40 days, or whether they stayed out the exact amount of time representing 1 year for their suffering and wandering around in the wilderness, or whether Moses said, I want you to come back on this day, 40 days from now, and be back. I don't know what the case is, but they were there for a long time. And they became defeated in their thinking. They gave an evil report. Doesn't mean or morally evil. It means, I'm just not in my notes, but I was thinking of a verse that says, whatsoever is not of faith is what? Sin. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin. If we lack faith to do what God has called us to do, that's a sin in his eyes. And this evil report was based upon the fact that God had already told him it's theirs. Every place he said your feet treads upon will be yours. And they're coming back with this evil report, striking fear in the hearts of the people. And since they were already defeated, they'd already lost the battle, whether they ever got on a battlefield or not. And there's a lot of people who go around today and have a similar attitude, not about claiming land necessarily, but about their opportunities to take a stand for the Lord and to do what God has called them to do. They're already defeated. They don't think they can do anything or anything right. They will often use those, what do you call them? The English word that it means, the definition is that we throw everything in a category that should be reserved for a specific, not generalization, but what is it? Somebody say something? Absolute. That's what I'm looking for. They use absolutes, We are all grasshoppers in a sense. And there were giants there. There were probably a small minority of people from the line of the Anakim, sons of Anak, who were taller by heredity. The children and grandchildren sort of adopted that same physical characteristic of being taller than the rest of them. But if you look at the report, it says they are all tall. They're all big. They're all giants in the land. That wasn't true. Some of them were giants. Probably a relatively small percentage of them were giants. And did you see how these exaggerations come into play? It says, the land, it's a kind of land that eats us up. The land eats us up? Wait a minute. Were you not carrying back with you large clusters of grapes and pomegranates and all these wonderful samples of what that fertile land was producing for the benefit of the people and therefore to be enjoyed by us as God's people? And now you're saying the land itself eats you up. You see, there's these absolutes. When people start saying things like this, they're struggling from a spirit of inferiority. When they start saying, I can never do anything right. I'm always making stupid decisions. I'm useless. I can't do anything. When people start making statements like that, whether they mean it or not, there may be a sign that person is struggling with an attitude of inferiority. They don't think they can do anything right. And again, our thoughts will govern our actions. Someone has said, change your thoughts and you will change your world. And the unique thing about these 10 men who came back with this evil report was, if you look in the earlier, we didn't read it, in the early verses of this chapter, these were not random volunteers. These men were heads of their tribes. So there were 12 tribes, right? 12 different men that went in. These men were no doubt perceived as not only being men with leadership qualities, they were already serving in positions of leadership. They were respected by their people. They were the best that each tribe had to offer. We're going to send our head guy to be part of this 12-man entourage to go into the land and spy it out. They were handpicked by Moses himself, a man of great faith. And he told them in verse 20 to be of good courage. When they first came back, everything looked good. They said, but this can truly sustain us. Our people would do well. We could become farmers. We could be herdsmen. This land affords all of these great opportunities for us to go in and get back what God has for us. But then they mention in verse 28 those giants. And again, by the end of the chapter, they're involved in full-fledged exaggeration. I actually used this story, unsuccessfully I should add. I came from I was in a small school in Victorville, California, and I had a group of guys that were pretty athletic, and I started a basketball team. I mean, we were all in on this, man. We bought uniforms for them, and I wanted to toughen them up before we started playing the teams in our own local area. So I heard about a tournament that was taking place in Long Beach, California. We were in the high desert area at the time, and I said, "Hey guys, we're gonna go play in this tournament." And it cost a little bit of money, and there's a little travel time. We had to stay overnight. There were some expenses, but I wanted to toughen them up, to to get them ready for all the other teams we'll be playing in our own conference. And I took them down to this tournament. Well, the guys that they had real coaches. Our team didn't have a real coach. Our team had a guy that liked basketball. I didn't have any coaching experience, any classes on coaching. I just loved to be with the guys, and I actually played with my guys during PE. We didn't have after-school practices. We just played during PE, much like we do with our kids here. We didn't take it so seriously, but I wanted those guys to do well. I mean, we got them uniforms, got them all hyped up about this, got down there, and during warm-ups of the first game, we happened to play the best team in the tournament in the first game of that tournament. These guys were bigger, faster. Their uniforms looked a lot better than ours, and they had a real coach on their team. And our guys were out there, and I noticed during warm-ups, our guys kept looking over at the other players. The layup line, they make their layup, and they're looking over at these guys, and I'm seeing signs there that were not good. And they threw the opening tip, and we went, and at halftime, we were losing like about 20 or 30 points. I think we barely cracked double digits in our scoring for the first half. And so since it was a legitimate tournament, we had a locker room. We never had that. We had a place to go to talk to the coach, me, could talk to the players and, give them a pep talk. And I, for some reason, brought out this story in the Bible and said, you guys are just like those spies that went into Kenya. You're looking at them. Sure, they're taller and their uniforms look better. And they have a real coach over there and they're better looking than you, but hey, you can still play against these guys. And I'd like to tell you a warm story that they came back in the second half and climbed their way back in and won at the buzzer. I'd like to tell you that, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that. They lost the game. In fact, it was a double elimination tournament. We lost that game, sat out, watched some teams, played a second game, lost that, and that was our tournament. So we went all the way over there to Long Beach, paid the fees to enter this. We lost our first two games. And I was so discouraged, I loaded them in the bus, we headed back. We didn't even wait around for the award ceremony where the Anakim could get their trophies for being, better than we were. It was just and they were very deflating. But really, the truth of the matter was, we lost that tournament before the opening tip. They were already convinced they would have no way of beating that team. So we're going back home, and the guys are talking. We stopped for lunch or whatever, and I'm listening to their banter in the back of the bus, and these guys are saying stuff like this. We could have beat them. If we'd have just stopped that one player, we could have beaten them. And they're saying all the things I thought, well, that's a little late for that. Easy to say that when you're on the bus ride home. We are just as guilty. In our minds, we are convinced that there are things that we cannot do as God's children. Some of you might say, I could never read my Bible faithfully every day. Or some of you say, I could never share my faith with a stranger. Or I could never volunteer to take a Sunday school class, or whatever. You're convinced that you would just not be able to do it, and that thinking will spread over into your actions. Write down this reference. I won't have time to turn to it, but in Psalm 27, verses 1 through 3, David expresses his thoughts and his faith toward a God who will intervene on his behalf. And it would have been a great passage to have read to my boys before we played that basketball game. It talks about courage in the face of fear. It doesn't talk about the absence of conflict. It talks about the fact that God is going to be with us during our conflict. And it speaks of the kind of attitude that we need to have when we approach our challenges in life. The problem is, where are we going to focus our attention? Is it going to be on ourselves and our own abilities, or is it going to be on God and what He can do through our lives? One of the classic examples of a person who struggled with an inferiority complex, ironically, was the man who commissioned these 12 men to go out, and he said to them on their way out, "Fear not." By the way, he said the same thing to them when they decided to go anyway, in spite of the giants. He said, "Fear not." Well, it's ironic because when Moses was first approached by God to lead the people out of bondage 40 plus years earlier, he started making excuses. That's one indication we have an inferiority complex. When God tells us to do something, we know clearly that He wants us to do something, we start making excuses. And he said his first excuse of many was that he could not speak well. Apparently had a stuttering problem. God was asking him to be his spokesman to Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world. And he says, I can't do that. I can't speak. And there were other excuses he offered as well. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 11, he basically, I'm going to paraphrase what he says, "Who am I, small, little, meaningless, insecure, convicted felon, Moses, to go to this powerful man and tell him to who am I to do this? I'm nobody. I'm the least in my father's house. I'm a nobody." And God's answer to that was kind of interesting, and it reinforces an important point. I guess if we forget everything else about this lesson, remember this. God's answer to Moses seems a little out of context unless you look at it carefully and consider what's happening. God says, "Who am I?" When Moses says, "Who am I that I should go and approach him?" And God says, "Here's what you need to tell him. Tell them that the I am has sent you. My name is." Who are you? Who do I tell him sent me? And God gave him his Hebrew name, Jehovah, which is I am. He said, "Tell him I am has sent you." So, in other words, Moses was nobody, but God was everybody. If God is on our side, it doesn't matter who we are or what. And Moses struggled through those insecurities. He had all these problems, and he kept making excuses, and finally God answered all of them patiently, demonstrated an encouraging response to Moses' excuses, says that they're not going to work, so what else do you have to say? Let's deal with that one. Okay, now you're going to go do what I said you want me to do. And now we look back on history, and Moses is a man of legend. In fact, Moses could be considered, rightly considered, one of the greatest natural leaders that ever walked this planet. I mean, he delivered all of God's people from bondage in Egypt, and tremendous things were accomplished even after the Exodus in his life. But at first, he struggled with an inferiority complex, this attitude that I can't do it. I can't do what you want me to do, God. And God had to patiently bring him around. I wonder if we don't do the same thing. We all have inadequacies, perceived inabilities. There are things we're convinced we cannot do. Maybe even legitimate handicaps. I mean, a speech impediment is a legitimate handicap. If you were in Moses' sandals and said to go before Pharaoh, and God says, "I want you to communicate my words to him," and the first sentence out of your mouth should be this: "God said, let my people go," that would be hard enough. But imagine saying that with a speech impediment. And people that deal with legitimate handicaps are well acquainted with extra challenges that they face in doing what God wants them to do. And some of the most inspiring stories on earth are people who overcome these challenges on earth. So let's discuss this terrible attitude. Some of them will be more obvious to us, but this one is bad in the sense that it will restrict us from doing what God wants us to do. Now, here's our points. I have 10 minutes to give you all these points. Number one, the basic reasons for inferiority, and I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can. Do we have these, Liam? Okay, number one, an unfortunate experience with failure. So that's one of the reasons why we deal with inferiority. Because in some way, or in some ways, in our previous life, in the past, we have attempted something and failed. So we wrongly assume, since I failed in this area, I won't be able to do this because I'm a failure in that area. That's a weakness of mine. That's an inadequacy of mine. Once we fail, we're convinced that failure becomes a part of our lives. Remember this: failure need not be final. So if you think you struggle with an attitude of inferiority, write that statement down. It's not part of it. We don't have a screen for it, but write that down and put it on a nice 3x5 card or something and stick it on your bathroom mirror or your refrigerator or something and look at it often. Failure need not be final. The truth is, failure is a part of life. We have all failed. Not at something, at many things. We've all failed at things in our lives. You heard the story, I'm sure, before, but Thomas Edison failed at his attempt to invent a light bulb hundreds of times. But he just kept at it. He just kept at it. And maybe we'd be sitting in the dark today if it wasn't for Thomas Edison's determination to work through those failures in his life. And people that are well acquainted with failure, you'll often find this sad byproduct of that, is they will often criticize success. Because when they fail and they see other people succeed, it makes them feel more inferior. So people who are perceived as failures and they've convinced themselves that they can't do anything, don't like to see other people succeed, and they'll often criticize success in the lives of other people, spiritually or otherwise, because they themselves deal with this feeling of failure. If you're the kind of person who never fails, or if I say to you, what's a recent failure in your life? And if you can't think of anything, it's my contention that you're not trying hard enough. You're not trying to accomplish something. You're not pushing yourself or challenging yourself. You're not spreading your wings. You're not asking God to put you in a situation where you have to trust Him and exercise your faith. So if you haven't failed, it's my contention that you haven't tried. Go try something for God. Do something that puts you out of your comfort zone, and you'll find sooner or later that you'll experience failure. Big people who attempt big things will often make big mistakes. And so we've all tasted of that bitter cup of failure. It's just that some people dwell there, and they come to expect it. And they get this complex about themselves that they're going to fail at everything that they do in life. It's deflating to be around people like that. It's like they're parked at a meter, and the meter says, not expired, but it says fail. And they sit there and they're just staring at that meter for minutes, for hours. And then when it expires and an opportunity comes up and the fail goes down and potential success comes up, they run out and throw another coin in there until fail pops up again. I'm not comfortable with perceived success. I'm a failure, so I have to fail, and I'm going to set myself up for failure. You meet people like that who set themselves up for failure. When you run into a homeless person out in the streets this week, that is a person who has set themselves up for failure. They're not trying to pursue success. There are resources available for everybody to get it together. And thank God for the many wonderful stories of people who left that lifestyle and did something with their lives. But they are perceived failures. They believe that other people look at them as a failure, that they'll never be able to get over their addiction or problems or habit, that there's nothing going right for them, and they are not comfortable. I had a man who attended this church years ago who had been incarcerated. Not just incarcerated for a good period of his life. We had a man in our church who befriended him, and he had a wife, and he and his wife started attending our church. We started helping him, and he was just unstable. He was just not at ease with himself. And finally I learned, after several months of trying to encourage him, and we sent that man to mentor him and disciple him, that he had been arrested and violated his probation. He was back in prison. And I said, what happened? What in the world happened? And his wife explained to us that this pattern has been repeated before, that he never felt at ease on the outside, that his life centered around being incarcerated, and he willfully and intentionally violated his probation and committed another crime, a minor crime, howbeit, but it landed him back in prison, and that he was doing fine back in prison. Now, you and I have a hard time wrapping our minds around that. Like, what? But he had so convinced himself that he didn't deserve. By the way, when he got out, somebody set him up with, he had a good paying job. He was coming to church faithfully. His wife was thrilled. He was back as a part of her life. He threw all of that away because he had an inferiority complex. By the way, I should let you know, this guy wasn't a wimp. This man played middle linebacker for the then Oakland Raiders. He played professional football for a few years. Big, tall, scrapping guy, muscle-bound guy. But he thought he was a failure because he was told he was a failure growing up. And he believed it, and he never got out of that pattern. As he thinketh in his heart, so is he. So one reason we battle inferiority is because of an unfortunate experience with failure in the past. So I had in my high school, the athletic director put all these placards all over the beams, similar to these, the beams in our gymnasium, our locker room, rather, not our gym, our locker room, had all these placards all over the place with all these sayings on there. And one of the sayings was this: a winner never quits and a quitter never wins. Now, here I am, I haven't been back to see that. 50 years later, I still remember that placard. A winner never quits and a quitter never wins. And people with inferiority complex need to dwell on statements like that present a truth to them. Second reason for inferiority is an inadequate assessment of one's abilities. You never help yourself by focusing on what you cannot do. You know, I can't be consistent in my Christian life. I can't be the mother or father I'm supposed to be. I can't share my faith with someone. I can't overcome this besetting sin. If you keep saying stuff like that to yourself, then it'll be self-fulfilling. You won't be able to do that because as you think in your heart, so are you. Paul was a man who was well acquainted with difficulties and challenges in life. In fact, we would all agree that Paul had some things he wanted to do that he was never able to do. He writes about some of those in the book of Acts. He had intentions to do things. He was determined to do something, and he was not able to do it. But Paul is the same guy who wrote to us that wonderful verse in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. He had a proper perspective of that. You know, this is what is in my heart to do. If God changes my plans, then I'm going to go with that because God's in ultimate control of my life. But he's not going to let that define who he was because he failed in some area and allow that to cause him to think I'm going to fail in every area of my life. He just wouldn't do that. A final reason for inferiority is a lack of motivation due to limited faith. Jesus said if you have faith the size of a grain of mustard seed, you can say to the mountain, move, and it'll be removed hence. You can cast mountains away with the smallest amount of faith. So an inferiority complex really boils down to a lack of faith in God. If we can't believe God and trust God, then we can't move forward in any area of our life that seems to be a challenge for us. So how to overcome inferiority. Let me give you these points real quickly. I have 2 minutes, and we'll just touch on them real quickly. Acknowledge the unlimited resources of God. Remember, they came in, they said, this is a great place. They're almost schizophrenic. This is great. It's flowing, a land flowing with milk and honey. Look at the samples we brought back. Isn't this great? Oh, but by the way, nevertheless, there are giants there too. And the land's going to swallow us up. The land can't do anything to them. It's the people that they would have to battle. And they're all giants. No, they were not all giants. Only some of them were giants. And we're grasshoppers in their sight. An insect. You see, when that doubt and fear takes over in our lives, we'll begin to exaggerate things, you know. And Moses reminded them that he said the giants were bread for them. You can eat them up. They're bread for you. He says their defense is departed from them. They have no defense against you. God has promised you that land. He said the Lord will be with you. And then on 2 occasions, including in chapter 14, he said they should not fear the people. So acknowledge the unlimited resources of God. Secondly, avail yourself to all that God has put at your disposal. Now, go back and review. This is the same crowd that was delivered. Now, they wandered for 40 years. Many of the adults, their bones had been strewn in the desert. This is a long period of testing for them because of their unbelief. Not just initially, but all through their time in the wilderness. And so, but everybody there knew about the Exodus. They had commemorative events to remember. They have even today what's called the Passover, to remember the events of them. They remember how God delivered them from the most powerful army, the Egyptian army, how they crossed the Red Sea, how he sustained them with food and water, manna, on a daily basis. See, they got through all of that all those years. These are people that had a history of proven success with God. And yet he says, go in and take care of these few giants and get in and claim the land. And they just fell apart, completely fell apart. They didn't put in mind all that God has put at our disposal. 1 John 4:4 says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And then finally, aspire to develop your God-given potential to its fullest extent. Thank you, Liam. It's a shame for a Christian to waste his or her potential for God. It involves being strong in our faith, believing God and trusting God. And I will say this, in my overall experience with Christians throughout the course of my life, the people with the most limitations, I would say, the people without the greatest potential to do something for God have often done the most because they've had the greatest faith. Not the greatest natural ability, not the greatest circumstances or past background and family upbringing, not the greatest intelligence or gifts, but they've had a great faith in God, and that is what has compelled them to do great things for the Lord, because they believed that God would be with them and they had nothing to fear. So for those of you struggling with this particular attitude of inferiority, take heart in some of these stories. Review the details of Numbers chapter 13. Look in Exodus chapter 3 and 4 at the circumstances that involve Moses' calling to begin with, and how he used all of those excuses, and how God patiently overcame those and made a great leader out of him. It will inspire you to do the same thing as well.